right, so Jacob, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you have spent most of your years so far in the southwest part of the country, but tell me and the listeners a little bit more about what I would call like the tinkering nature of your upbringing.
Yeah, sure. So I describe myself as a nerd with a little asterisk next to it, which is that not that typical like bookworm glasses nerd. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a fine brand of nerd. But I was more of the tinkerer, like you said. So, when I was young, I was always wanting to understand how things worked, taking things apart, building things. That's definitely translated and followed me throughout life. But, as a kid, it was mostly just painful for my family because I've blown up more than one toaster in my day and built sound systems for my room that people probably didn't appreciate. But I've always kind of been into that sort of a thing. So my one sentence summary of that is that I wasn't the kid that skateboarded. I was the kid that built ramps that the skateboarders used. Is kind of how I was growing up.
I have to admit, I was every morning with my son. We do usually like eggs and bacon or eggs and toast or something like that. And the last few
Sure.
mornings that we've made toast, I've thought about you and I thought to myself, man, maybe one day my son is going to be the kid taking apart the toaster because to this point, he's not someone who's super into toys. He's very much into how do things work, how do the wheels move and the gears work. So that's really cool to hear that you grew up that way. I
Yeah.
uh, I might have one of my own under my wing soon. You also said
Lucky
that.
guy.
Oh yeah, I know. Thank you. You said that you were also into woodworking. You had kind of like a hardware phase, and then you got into building the computers. Also, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So my phases of interest evolved as I got older, and I think really what I went into was into building radios and all the little parts and components that go with that. I had aunt's father who is not my grandfather. You know how that gets complicated, but he was a ham radio operator, and one summer I spent time with him and built a whole system for that, and that really got me into electronics that then translated into computers. So building your own computers. And then ultimately that went into kind of like the software side of things in terms of using computers versus
Mm.
building them.
And you had an uncle, I believe, who worked at Oracle. So the way the story goes from our earlier conversations, and correct me if I'm wrong, is
Mm-hmm.
that he eventually gave you a book speaking to computers and specifically about building HTML websites. And I feel old even just saying it, but I think we both grew up in a similar era where
Yeah.
HTML websites and some CSS was the hot thing in the early kind of internet web days. What was that? What was that like? And was that something that kind of caught fire right away for you, or did it sit on the shelf for a bit?
Yeah. So your recollection of that story is correct for sure. And um, yeah, I mean, we're not old yet, but in the age of the internet, we are dinosaurs. So when I first got into this kind of stuff, Google existed technically, but it was not a resource you used to readily look up anything you wanted like it is now. So books were still the best resource you could get for learning new things and answering questions that you had. And yeah, he gave me that book, and I mean, it caught right away. I went through that thing front to back. I started building websites, being able to write code and then refresh your browser and see something you created like on the screen in front of you
Yeah.
just blew my mind. You know what I mean? I felt like the most powerful being in the world, being able to do this.
Yeah.
So I definitely caught the bug and really stuck with that and kept focusing on that for a lot of years to come. And, ultimately that drove my career eventually as well.
Yeah. And we'll get to your career in a couple of minutes, but I want to kind of
Sure.
talk about this sort of, I guess I wouldn't call it funny, but a lot of my guests have this interesting side path that they take kind of during the collegiate years. And for you, that ended up being political science, which
Yeah.
obviously poli sci isn't HTML. But tell us a little bit about that journey through political science courses. And then I believe you ended up leaving because you said to yourself, hey, this isn't it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to school for political science. I was turning into an adult at the era of, Obama and him running for president. And regardless of your political affiliation, um, he riled up a lot of young people to care about politics. And I got caught up in that and wanted to get involved and start building my own opinions, not just parrot what other people said, and, understand what was going on in the world and vote and play a role. And I still feel strongly in all those areas. But I ultimately was going to school for political science, and didn't end up graduating with a degree in political science, and didn't go that way professionally. I still kind of had that HTML book in the back of my head, I guess, from
Yeah.
back in the day.
Yeah. So at about 21, I believe, you moved into the professional world for good. You started working with a tech company, and it really got you off to the races at a relatively young age. What was the first stop in the kind of the career journey on your way to Nurture Boss, that you, and then I guess on top of that, what were you doing there? What was your day-to-day like?
Yeah, so I dropped out of college to go get a job in tech, right? Because I had this skill set that I had, honed on my own and taught myself, and I was passionate about it, and I realized I could get paid to do it. So I kind of abandoned the school thing and went into this job where I did digital work and engineering work for a small marketing and advertising company. So primarily building websites. Joomla is what we were using at the time. This is before WordPress or Squarespace or any of the things that are out there now. And putting a lot of my time and energy into working on our customers' digital presence, originally in websites, and kind of from there started to get it into the marketing side of things, Google Analytics, becoming a new type of nerd, a data nerd, and, wanting to learn more about that stuff on the marketing side.
And I don't want to rush through the story because it's an interesting one, but it ended up not working out at that agency. They ended up not kind of continuing, but the way the story goes is you walked away with something like 50 clients on all the servers or something like that, and explain to the listeners kind of what that meant and how that segued into your next career stop.
Yeah. So, that company shut down, ran out of money, went out of business. I mean, the story of millions of small businesses around the country every year. But when we shut it down, I asked the owner of the company, what are we going to do with all of our customers? We host their websites, we update them from time to time. Hosting them just meaning we keep them on the internet for our customers. What's going to happen to those? And he said, well, we're just going to shut them down. And I said, well, I'll take them. I'll maintain them. I'll host them. So I reached out to every customer of this company. I said, hey, if you give me $25 a month, I'll keep your website live and I'll make any updates that you need. And I walked away with my first experience in kind of recurring income from something I had done myself. And that was really my first dip into kind of the entrepreneurial side of the world as well. And that was pretty exciting for me to see that was something I could do is make myself income.
That's really interesting. And your next company was a VoIP company, and I believe you were hired to kind of continue to do the same types of things that you were, leaving the previous agency working on, which was managing websites, managing servers. But over time, you ended up getting moved over to the marketing team, and then eventually into another team. But talk about those sort of like inner company stops and what you learned along the way, because I think that really mattered kind of in retrospect, looking back at my notes from our earlier conversations when it comes to MarTech, which we'll get to. But before we get there, kind of run us through those couple teams that you worked on at that VoIP company.
Yeah, so I got hired there after I left that marketing and advertising agency, and like you said, it was to manage websites. They had servers they had purchased to run their VoIP product, and that servers belonged to basically a website hosting company, and they had a small team that kept them up and running and made customer updates and edits. And it was really the same thing I was doing at the previous job. But what happened was they ultimately shut that part of the business down to focus fully on the VoIP side. And I got transitioned to the marketing team. And this is really my first experience and exposure to targeted marketing and, data informed decision making behind marketing. And I got to see what it was like to build out digital ad campaigns and email campaigns with, platforms like Pardot, if you're familiar. And I got to see how decisions that we made in the marketing department would affect how the consumers behaved and decisions that the consumers would make. And that was really exciting for me. That was kind of my second aha moment where realizing I could make whatever I want show up on the internet was really exciting for me, making me realize that I can influence, of course, in a positive way, decisions that buyers are making was really cool. And that's definitely when like the marketing bug bit for me. And then ultimately I ended up moving one more time within that company to the software engineering team, where I really got into application development and kind of in the weeds, in-depth software engineering and development, and kind of honed those skills in that final department.
Mm. Yeah, and I think this is a really pivotal moment in your career, and obviously the reason why things have been going so well. One of the reasons why I should say things are going well with Nurture
Sure.
Boss, but I think the combination of those first few years of experiences really allowed you to kind of fully form an understanding of MarTech that has obviously catapulted you forward with the company today. And I guess I would say I'll go so far as to say that that has kind of more or less become the theme of your career at this point.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, this idea of MarTech, I'm sure some of the listeners don't know exactly what that means, or they have their own understanding of what that means potentially. In your own words, tell us what that is, and then maybe what drew you to it and why you've stayed in it.
Yeah, so MarTech is like our fancy shorthand for marketing technology. And really, this is a broad term that can cover any sort of software platform or thing, I guess, that we use to orchestrate and strategize and execute around marketing within our business. So the most obvious examples of this is going to be, a CRM that a business like me would use, like a HubSpot or a Salesforce. I would also categorize some of the stuff that folks in multifamily are using, fitting into that category nicely as well. Software we use to manage Google Ads could fit into this category, which is something most people are familiar with. But really, it's a broad term to describe technology used to help strategize and execute on the marketing side of your business.
Mm. And you spent a few more years with a couple companies honing your MarTech skills. Can you give us a quick rundown of what that journey looked like? Because I know at least one individual along that journey, and I'm sure there are many more. You
Sure.
mentioned to me as being really influential and someone who's still in close contact with you today with Nurture Boss. But run us through those next few experiences, and then let's dive into Nurture Boss.
Yeah, absolutely. So I transitioned over to a company called Integrate. Integrate is a startup that just recently had a very successful acquisition, and they are a B2B MarTech company. So that means they sell their product to other businesses, usually large tech companies, Google, Verizon, Adobe, Oracle. These are the kind of folks that are using Integrate's product. I was hired on the engineering team to help build their new product, their version 2, if you will. And I got to learn a lot about how companies market their product to their consumers and how to build technology that really facilitates that. That company is founded and ran by a gentleman named Jeremy Bloom. And he was a big influence on me and kind of reigniting that fire of entrepreneur, just being an entrepreneur in general, I guess, that kind of got ignited back from that ad agency, a few years prior.
Mm.
And was really cool to get to be involved in this startup and watch him build it and watch him make decisions and move the company this direction or that. And that was definitely influential in kind of what I would end up doing in my future. From there, I went over to another local Arizona company called Infusionsoft. They have a CRM that targets small businesses and allows those businesses to organize and market to their prospective customers and existing customers. So again, this is very much in the MarTech space. I led a team of engineers or several teams of engineers for a while over at Infusionsoft. And then ultimately, I went back to Integrate. This time, though, I joined on the product team. So when I left Integrate, I was a director of engineering. I led the engineering department and all the software engineers that worked there. When I came back, I joined as a group product manager, and I led a team of product managers. And this was crucial for me, I think, in my development because engineers really focus on how you build the thing. Product focuses on what you build. So they're out there doing market
Mm.
research, figuring out what pain points your customers have, ideating on possible solutions to those pain points. So that really taught me how to look at, problems in a way of trying to identify solutions.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that we went through that because I think it clearly builds up to the work that you're doing today at Nurture Boss. And
Mm-hmm.
we met earlier this year, and one of the things that has, continued to impress me about you and your approach is your, you do have this blend of, you're very practical. You have sort of this engineering brain, you can tell, but at the same time you have, realistic marketing focused sort of data points that are all about the product side. And so it's really interesting to see you sort of talk and work through dialogue on these topics, because it's clear that you understand both sides, and now knowing your story, it's understandable why you approach it the way you do. So with that said, I want to pivot into the startup, Nurture Boss, and it's something that started with a spark for you, had to do with apartment hunting. So as we kind of transition here into the real estate world, tell me a little bit about that spark and what was going on, and why did you say, hey, let's get this thing going?
Yeah. So I have, I'm a homeowner now in my 30s. All through my late teens and 20s, I was a renter, right? And I have rented many apartments throughout my life. And the experience was always the same for me, which is summed up in a word: frustrating. The way I looked at it is, I'm basically trying to give you, the apartment complex, tens of thousands of dollars a year so that I can live there, and I can't get a phone call returned. I can't get a question answered, right? So
Yeah.
what I found is that I'd have a handful of properties that I thought maybe I wanted to live in, but ultimately I'd usually end up picking the one that gave me the time of day and answered my questions. And maybe that was the right choice and the best place to live. Maybe it wasn't, but it was the one that I got a response from, right? Then you move into the apartment, and again, communication kind of stops. You don't hear from the on-site team. You don't hear from the property management company. I get an email once in a while letting me know that the pool's going to be closed because somebody broke a glass bottle. The fire marshal's coming by. You need to put your extinguisher out in the hallway. But you didn't really get that, hey, we're happy you're here. Are things going well? Can we do anything for you? That kind of personal outreach. And it felt very transactional, which made it feel less like a home, right? And that was frustrating for me. It was that experience that ultimately led me to start, thinking of the idea that eventually became Nurture Boss.
And so talk to us about that time of transition from, these are ideas rolling around in your head, you've identified a problem, right? There's always this, identifying the problem first, coming up with a few ideas, and then taking it to market to test it and kind of see what the reaction is, in with boots on the ground and in reality. What was your first step for Nurture Boss? Was it asking around to a few friends? Did you jump right into building prototypes? What was that kind of, going back to my engineering / marketing analogy for the way that you think, which one did you get started with first?
Yeah. So I spent, 30 minutes asking people what they thought about the idea, and kind of did a little bit of market research. But what the thing about getting people's feedback on ideas is that I have never found it to be useful in terms of making a decision if you want to build something or not. Now, I can explain that more, and that's not to say you shouldn't do market research and talk to your customers. You absolutely should talk to your customers. If you ask your friends what they think about an idea, rarely are you going to hear something that is, people are, risk adverse and don't like chances. So that's not me. I want to go for it.
Yeah.
So I very quickly built an MVP and got it in the hands of some leasing teams at apartments. And, long story short, within a few weeks, there had been several leases that had signed in direct correlation to messages that Nurture Boss had sent. We can get more into, what Nurture Boss is and what we do to give you more detail there. But it was like, hey, this works. And it worked so well that within a couple of weeks, I had 10 customers across 3 states, because word of mouth, these other properties wanted to use the product. So for me, that was all the indicator of product market fit I really needed to go all in on the idea.
And for listeners, this isn't back in 2010 or 2015. This is 2020, as the pandemic is really sort of kicking off. Here's Jacob taking this big risk and getting the MVP out there to a few groups. What challenges did you come up against right away? Like maybe real estate specific. Were there any challenges that you faced right away, or that you knew that you were going to have to combat as a kind of new product on the scene?
Yeah, so a few things. I think the first thing is that in the last 2.5 years, multifamily has taken leaps and bounds in the forward direction in terms of adoption of modern technology and new strategies. And that is very much new in the last 24 months. So when we first started, presenting NurtureBoss to the world of commercial real estate, it was very much like, no, you don't have anything like this. No, we're not replacing something you already have, but you should have something like this. And let me explain why, right? Let me tell you why you need
Mm,
NurtureBoss, which is hard. When there's a large educational piece to the sell of a product, it makes it much more difficult to do that, right? So that was one of the big things that we came up against. The other big surprise for me when I got into multifamily is that multifamily is very much a close-knit community and very much a closed group, right? You can't
right.
just wander in off the street into a room filled with multifamily executives and say, hey, you don't know me and I don't know much about your industry, but I want to tell you about this product, right? You really have to pay the piper, so to speak, put in the sweat equity, put in the time, put in the hours, and
Hmm.
get to know the industry, become involved in the industry, so that not only you can build better products that service the industry, but also you can talk the talk and walk the walk so that you can get a seat at the table to even have the conversation of getting a potential customer to consider your product.
Right. Yeah, and I think this dovetails nicely into this idea that multifamily is behind the times, or I've heard a few people have mentioned that it's kind of a laggard industry. More of the outspoken younger leaders, I would say, across the multifamily space have brought up these concerns. And while things are changing, it is a industry slow to change. I've noticed that you've been able to be a voice on behalf of the change towards the industry, to the industry, and in many cases, within the industry at those tables in those conversations. Um, do you feel like that's just kind of like a symptom of a greater problem? Do you feel like that's something that is rapidly evolving and getting better? I guess there's not like a direct question there, but I'm kind of curious what you think about just the industry as a whole, and having to educate and move them forward into the future, and if that feels like it's going to be an uphill battle for quite some time or not.
Yeah. So I'll preface the answer to this question with that I've learned a lot about multifamily in the last, 2.5 years. And, I gave you the example of I built NurtureBoss as a troubled renter. I said the on-site team never got back to me, right? The on-site complaining this, complaining that. What I learned when I got into multifamily was that, hey, that on-site team, they actually have like 35 different jobs. And
Mm,
it is incredibly difficult for them to get through a
hmm.
day and get all the things done they need to get done. So,
Yeah.
that experience of the on-site team is a big driver of our product today. One of the other things that I learned about multifamily is that this is a lot different than selling a widget. You're selling somebody a home, right? This is a huge purchasing decision. There are literally people's, living in your product, right? Hundreds of people living in your product. And it is not, you can't approach it the same way you would market, the new iPhone, right? Because they're totally
Mm,
different problems. So I think there's good reason why multifamily is sometimes slow to adopt new technology. Now, the reason why I think we need to kind of release our foot off the brake is because you have companies like NurtureBoss, Knox CRM, to name another one, where our products are made for you. I'm not selling NurtureBoss to a community and then going and selling it to a car dealer down the road, right? Our product
mm.
understands your problems, and these new innovative products in the market understand your problems and are built to solve them. So to try to bring this around to an answer, I get why historically the industry has been slow to adopt. It makes sense. I think that those concerns aren't here anymore. I think that we can open the floodgate and the industry can start benefiting from, frankly, the decades of technology advancements that have occurred since the first multifamily software was built back in the
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to see that progress.
Before we move forward, I want to give your sister a shout out because she joined the Nurture Boss team on the sales side of things, and she's actually, I believe, the one of the first folks that I met at this year's NAA conference. And I want to say, thanks to her for giving us the time of day to connect and learn more about
Mm-hmm.
Nurture Boss and a few other groups in the industry. But Tell me a little bit about how she fits into the equation because, you know, when I first met her and then you like a day later, I was like, oh, is this sort of like a family run business or did she start it with him or did Jacob join on?
Yeah.
But she kind of has a cool little story here. So as a sidecar, just let's give a little shout out and some props to Jessica.
Yeah, she deserves it. Absolutely. So Jessica's employee number one at NurtureBoss. She's my sister, and she heard me talking a lot about the company as I was building it. And then, kind of worse, is she heard me talking about how I was trying to sell the product. Now, she is a seasoned, very experienced veteran salesperson who has been in enterprise sales for over a decade. She's highly decorated at every job she's ever had, incredibly successful. And she just couldn't take it anymore listening to me talk about sales. And more or less, I think we remember this differently, but she said, listen, you need my help, right? Like you are not going to succeed here. You need my help. And I said, you're right, I do. And she joined and has led the revenue side of the business since she joined. It's thank goodness for that. And she also joined before I had done anything. I don't even know if I'd incorporated the business yet, right? So she stopped getting paid, came and worked for free at my startup under the promise that one day I would, raise money and be able to give her a paycheck, which thankfully we're well past that now. But she took a big leap of faith on me and NurtureBoss, which I'm grateful for.
Really cool. Let's dive into the nuts and bolts of NurtureBoss because I think this is really cool. Obviously a great product and a fascinating conversation to be having, post-pandemic in light of, as you said it, hopefully the industry is taking their foot off the brake. But NurtureBoss in general is in two buckets, right? It's this idea of lead to lease and this idea of lease to renewal, going back to the kind of the stories and the frustrations that you had. Let's dive into the lead to lease part of NurtureBoss. You had a bad experience. You had some frustrating experiences. Talk about how NurtureBoss aims to address that and really, no pun intended, really nurture that lead through the process to lease.
Yeah, absolutely. So NurtureBoss kicks in as soon as a new lead enters, your property management software or your CRM. And a few things happen right away. The first thing that happens is NurtureBoss looks at that lead's data and information to get a really good understanding of what is most important to this prospect and what kind of communication is most likely to lead them to continue to move through that sales funnel, that lead to lease lifecycle. Schedule a tour, apply online, sign a lease, right? Once we've kind of made that determination, we create a really custom and bespoke nurture track that speaks specifically to that prospect's needs, interests, and wants. And we start delivering that information through multiple channels, different, days of the week and times of the day. All these things are determined using, our data and AI automatically so that the prospect is getting the information they care about, that they need to make an intelligent decision without the on-site team having to get involved whatsoever. So not only is the on-site team with their 35 jobs getting a break from this task, also the prospect, like me back in my shoes, is not waiting to hear back, waiting to learn about the information that I care about.
Yeah. And, on the marketing side, on the branding, marketing, and sort of lead gen side at our company, we see this all the time where a lead is delivered to the developer or the real estate group or the leasing team, kind of whoever's, again, one of those 35 jobs, whoever's handling that, it can be fumbled really easily, right? If it's not handled in a way where it's being nurtured and understood, it's really easy for, even free leads, even pre-leasing leads coming in the door, and they just kind of get lost in the ether because no one's nurturing them, no one's moving them forward. And to your point, something that you said to me in our earlier conversation had to do with, renting out an apartment is complex. There's a lot of bits and pieces to that sales cycle that people are considering all along the way, from those early touch points to kind of the nurture phase that you're referring to. What's a good example or two that you can give in how you as NurtureBoss nurture that lead and kind of get them interested and excited about a particular property? Like, what are some of those nurturing steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to say what you said again, because it's so important, right? The process of buying or leasing an apartment is incredibly complex. People care about different things. You know, I want to live here because my gym is close by and there's a Starbucks that I can walk to every morning. Well, you know, she wants to live here because there's a dog washing station, right? And she wants to live here because they have this great two-story gym. So if we know this ahead of time, right, if we're fortune tellers, then we can just give them the information we know is going to seal the deal. But what Nurture Boss is doing to try to become this fortune teller I've described is we're measuring how these prospects are interacting with content. And if I notice that Chris keeps going to look at information about the neighborhood, I'm going to start feeding Chris more information about the neighborhood because I know that that's something that he's interested in, right? If I know that Jessica keeps looking at photos of the fitness center, then I'm going to start feeding Jessica more information about our amenities and the fitness center specifically. So this is kind of the way that we're able to, leverage our technology to get a really good understanding of, what is this person looking at? What are the data points this person cares about to make a decision? And how can we provide them the information that hits those data points so they can make that smart decision?
Yeah. And I think you said to me the renter should never have to prompt the leasing team or the group that is in charge of anything for them. And that's what you found yourself doing so many times, both when you were trying to find a place to rent and then once you had actually rented, how do I get in touch with somebody? Who's the phone number to call? Why won't anyone call me back? And I think that's the really important piece of Nurture Boss for these properties that want to level up that nurture game, is to think about incorporating something like this, because again, firsthand experience, we can bring leads in the door, but after that, it really depends on who's your leasing team, who's your contact that's really ushering these leads through that process, hopefully to a lease. Let's not look past and let's talk about this lease to renewal side of Nurture Boss. I think this is probably, in my experience, maybe something that gets kind of brushed over or pushed aside often for a lot of groups. Now though, it's coming into fall, late year 2022, and I think that there's a shift happening in the industry. You've been talking about it yourself. I think your sister has too, where it's not all roses and cupcakes anymore. All of these properties aren't totally flushed with renters, and turnover is happening. So let's talk about lease to renewal and where Nurture Boss really slides into that part of the process.
Yeah. So to dive in a little bit about that transition that we're seeing that you just mentioned as well, there's a lot of factors and a lot of line items on the ledger when we're calculating NOI, and the profit that we're making on our community. But a big detractor from that number is vacancy loss. And vacancy loss is described as the cost to you and the revenue that you lose by having a vacant unit, right? You have to turn a unit, clean it, paint it, repair it. You got to buy leads to fill it. You're not making rent while it's empty. So, historically, that hasn't been a big problem because rent increases have been going up so fast that getting that unit vacant is better, because the amount of increase in rent you're going to get from that new tenant makes up for your vacancy loss. And that's not the case as much as it was. And we're trending toward it being less and less the case. So all of a sudden, we're going back to where we were 5 years ago, where we care a lot about the vacancy loss number and bringing that down. So there's this renewed focus on renewals, if you will, and on resident retention, right? And frankly, the best way to create a good, loyal resident is to have a great prospecting phase, right? So doing a good job in the lead to lease is the first thing to do to create a good lease to renewal experience. However, when somebody does move in, there's lots of communication and outreach that you can do proactively to make sure that resident understands that you're a member of the community and that they're valued, so that you can increase that renewal rate. Increase the referrals of them recommending their friends to live there, and increase your online reputation, which also inevitably will increase your ability to capture new leads. So, keeping consistent follow-ups throughout the resident life cycle is crucial and key to really, increasing that NOI by bringing down vacancy loss, as well as those, other bullets that we went through.
You mentioned to me that Nurture Boss operates off this idea that resident retention really begins with the moment they sign the lease. And that stuck with me because it makes so much sense. And I think it's frankly something that's probably overlooked by the majority of the industry at this point. I mean, there's definitely groups that are doing a good job that and talk to this theme. But like automating that experience, automating some follow-ups, encouraging them to write online reviews, to push friends into the system through referrals. I think all of that's really important and interesting to keep, you know, a property moving forward like a well-oiled machine.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen, just to kind of transition into sort of like what you're seeing now and with Nurture Boss as a product in general, how have you seen the reception of Nurture Boss, the tools that it brings to the table? How have you seen that being received differently? You know, let's call it 2020 to now, you know, almost
Yeah.
3 full years later, which is pretty crazy. But what have you been seeing out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest change is I used to say, hey, Nurture Boss provides automation to nurture your leads. And people look at you like you spoke a different language. Now, every website out there talks about nurturing leads with automation, right? And now we don't get credit for that. I think that we've played a role in the community and being loud about it, but the industry is moving that direction, right? So that's the biggest change, really, is that Nurture Boss doesn't need our value prop doesn't need an explanation now for every phone call that we get on. People get it because the industry is talking about it, right? And
Right.
I think that that's the biggest shift that we've seen in our product living in the multifamily world over the last 2 years.
Let's look ahead a little bit. I want to maybe pick your brain. Hopefully this doesn't catch you off guard, but like the biggest shift that you're seeing in the multifamily space that potentially impacts the work that you're doing at Nurture Boss, or maybe said another way, what are you planning for at Nurture Boss on the technical side as you look ahead to 2023 and like how you see this product evolving along with the industry?
Yeah, so two things. The first is, you're going to hear this. If you haven't already heard it 100 times this week, you'll hear it, 100 times next week, which is centralized leasing, right? Everybody's talking about centralized leasing. And we definitely are thinking about that, building features within our product, as well as new products to help facilitate property management companies that want to move toward a centralized leasing model. It makes sense, especially with struggles of being understaffed that we're seeing right now, the advancement of technology, the increased revenue, the increased customer experience. It all makes sense, but that's where we're seeing everybody move. The other big thing that I'd say is really that resident side that I was referring to just previously as we were speaking. There's right now, everybody that's getting on the bandwagon of automation and nurture is on the bandwagon of prospect automation and nurture, which is great. We're there too. But the next thing that everybody's going to be scrambling for is the resident journey, right? And we're ahead there. We have a ton of great products that focus on the resident journey. And every day we release new features and products that focus on the resident journey. So that's something that you'll see more from Nurture Boss as well.
Yeah. Great. No, I love talking to you about this stuff. I mean, we could talk about it all afternoon, I think, because you speak so well to it. But let's start to wrap up, and let me hit you with a few rapid fire questions, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
I got you this far, so hopefully you don't turn off the camera and the microphone. So
yeah,
I'm curious to pick your brain about the shifts that we're seeing in multifamily and maybe just real estate in general. But over the last year or so, like what's maybe the most exciting thing that comes to mind as the industry moves forward or shifts, or maybe starts to like shake off some of the old ways of thinking?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm being a little repetitive, but I think it's worth it. Which is just the innovation that we're seeing in the industry is really the most exciting thing to me. I think the message that I want to get out there for folks that are on the operator side, not the vendor side or supplier side like myself, is the innovation's there, right? You're not missing the innovation. The companies, the innovative companies, we're out here doing stuff. You just need to reach out and grab it, right? You just need to accept it and give it a shot and see how it works for your portfolio. So I think that's the most exciting thing that I've seen is that shift.
Cool. Yeah. How about one book that you would recommend to the listeners right now that they run out, grab on Amazon or whatever and start reading it?
Yeah, so the book that we give every new hire at Nurture Boss is a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. This is not a new book. It's been around for a while now, but it's such a great book on, the original title. I don't know if this is the title anymore, but it was Radical Candor, How to Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity, right? So it talks about creating a radically candid environment where you provide feedback and have honest conversations with each other. And at a startup where we move 1,000,000 miles an hour, that's crucial. The flip side of my book recommendation is, again, the nerd in me. I'm a big sci-fi fantasy fan, and I'm just for the first time getting into the Wheel of Time series. So if you're into that kind of a thing, I 10 out of 10 recommend that book. And there's 15 of them. So if you like the first one, you got plenty more to read.
You got 15 or 14 more years to finish the rest of the series if you get started this year, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Really cool. No, really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I want to thank you again for joining me today, Jacob. There's really only one other thing for me to do right now, and that is to roll out the red carpet in front of you, tell the world what you're up to, where they can find you online.
Yeah, so LinkedIn is where it's at for Nurture Boss. That's where we're talking about what we're up to. It's where we're sharing our thoughts and insights, and then also our blog posts on our website as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Jacob is one of the best people I think to follow on LinkedIn, just to do a sort of a follow-up plug for him on there. He's always posting great insight, following industry news and trends, and then making some comments on them that are always insightful and helpful. So we'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes below so all the listeners can check it out. Jacob, thanks again so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast.